services are running during the latest strike across the network. Tens of thousands of RMT union members are staging today's action in the dispute over jobs, pay and conditions. Passengers are being urged to only travel by train if they must. Fraser runs a coffee stall at Glasgow's Queen Street station and says the strike will have a big impact.
There's no general traffic, the whole place is a ghost town. We're going to be closing early. We're losing out on like maybe 600 quid, 700 quid on the day, which is not a massive amount in the grand scheme of things, but we only really pull in 1,500, so it's quite big.
The government's accused the RMT of being hell-bent on creating further misery, but the union says its members are more determined than ever to secure an improved deal. The Duke of Cambridge says the entire country is so proud of the England women's football team for making the final of the Euros. The Lionesses thrashed Sweden 4-0 at Bramall Lane last night. They'll face either France or Germany at Wembley on Sunday. Beth Mead, who scored the opening goal last night, says they're on cloud nine.
The game becomes blurry when it's that much excitement, that many emotions. An incredible night, an incredible atmosphere again from the fans, and yeah, I'm super proud to be English and part of this team right now.
Rishi Sunak has announced he would scrap VAT on all domestic energy bills for the next year if he becomes Prime Minister. The former Chancellor has been accused of making a U-turn, having rejected immediate tax cuts so far in his campaign. His Tory leadership rival Liz Truss is focusing on policing, saying she would rank forces in league tables.
This is about transparency. This is about data that we already collect, being clear with the public about what the police are delivering. And I think the more the public know about what is happening, the more the police are focused on the public's priorities.
A watchdog has warned urgent change is needed to improve the performance of fire services in England. Inspectors looked at 15 brigades and found although there are some encouraging improvements, more needs to be done to reduce risks to public safety. It's hoped a new set of rules will force financial services firms to treat customers better. The Financial Conduct Authority's regulations include making it as easy to switch or cancel a service as it is to set one up. Firms are being given 12 months to implement the regulations. In the city, the FTSE 100 will reopen at 73.06. It was unchanged at the close last night, and the pound buys $1.20 and €1.18. LBC weather, dry and fine for most, feeling quite warm, especially in the south. A few light showers for some and turning cloudier in the southwest later, a high of 23 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Simon Conway.
Welcome to everyone's favorite game show, The Motorway Way, where car dealers compete to give you the best price for your car. Okay, Val, are you ready to sell?
Very ready.
Thousands of car dealers are waiting to bid.
£12,000, £12,200, £12,500.
You've sold your car.
That was easy.
Motorway, the way to sell your car.
In a quarter of a mile, keep right to continue towards Tums Lane, A355.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Morning, 3 minutes after 7 on Wednesday, July the 27th. For one key union leader, Mick Lynch, from whom you'll hear later in the programme, this is now a
Keep right
on workers, and we must fight, in his views. Fellow union boss John Leach from the RMT.
It's not fair that 40,000 railway workers will be forced to take industrial action when all they want to do is come to work. And it's not fair that the travelling public are going to be inconvenienced by a strike.
In other news, the NHS guidance that says trans women should be put on female wards, despite the concerns over issues as some patients self-identifying as women retain their male sexual organs. We'll look at that. To the race to be the Conservative leader, Rishi Sunak, saying, I will ditch VAT on energy bills, which seems to be a complete turnaround from what he was saying earlier this year. Meanwhile, his opponent, Liz Truss, will talk about league tables for police.
In a quarter of a mile, at the roundabout, take the first exit onto the M4 slip road to London, Heathrow Airport.
Business plunge in profits for... Well, should that be, I'm halving it. McDonald's see profits down by some 46%. On the subject of the transport, by the way, we've got Transport Secretary Grant Shapps will also be coming in as you struggle with services. About 1 in 5, roughly. In some areas, I have to tell you, by the way, it's even worse than that. Should we lift the mood? They've only gone and done it. The Lionesses roar into the final. Dare we dream? We'll have full coverage of that. And as we're on a sporting theme.
In a quarter of a mile, merge onto M4.
That presaged the events that kicked off 10 years ago today.
Games of the 30th Olympiad in 2012 are awarded to the city of
London, and that was in 2005. In 2012, the Games kicked off exactly a decade ago with the promise of legacy, a generation of children being propelled into sports stardom. What's the reality? Stay tuned.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
Continue on M4 for 9 miles.
Across to my LBC colleague Charlotte Lynch, who's one of London's busiest train stations, which has also got a picket line as well for one union leader, the RMT boss Mick Lynch, from whom you'll hear in this show, as you'll also hear from the government aspect on that, Grant Shouts, and Kwasi Kwarteng as well, the business secretary. The one union leader, Mick Lynch, this is now a fight back against a conservative war on workers. Mr. Lynch says Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak are trying to, quote, crush the unions. Is he right? Are we now, for those of you old enough to remember, in the dark days of the reign of Mrs. Thatcher, where it did appear to be the government versus the workers, particularly if you look at the printers, if you look at the miners and others? Are we at war? Let's get the background to the latest day of action, and it's a pretty widespread one, I have to tell you. Obviously, Charlotte Lynch at Euston. Charlotte.
Here we are again, Nick. 40,000 rail workers striking all over the country, meaning only 1 in 5 train services will run as planned. Euston is, as you'd expect, practically deserted. Only a handful of trains showing on the board. Nothing listed currently after 8:30 as picketers are outside. Signs saying, "Our rail, our future." Well, these people are here attempting to make journeys.
I agree with them. If you believe it's like you've got to strike, I don't take it. Maybe if I was a commuter, then I'll be up in arms about it. But I just think sometimes you've got to do what you've got to do. The government have got to listen, and that's how I feel.
I mean, I heard yesterday, I was asking around information. I went online and said, well, it's possible that at 7 o'clock they start. So I came here. Is it just possible to know the schedule?
Right now, I think we're ready to throw in the towel. I think we're about to give up.
Oh no.
Yeah, we wanted to go north to Manchester. It's way more complicated than it needs to be with the strike going on and everything. If there was a ticket person here to help us, it probably would be easy. But because the services are, on strike.
If they're striking over their pay, then as a Frenchman, where people strike, over conditions for people working on train services all the time, I mean, more power to them, I suppose. It's the only way that they can show their importance to, people just trying to go around their day-to-day travels.
Massive disruption is expected. Staff at 14 major operators are walking out. Some of the big ones: LNER, Avanti, Cross Country, Southwestern and Southeastern. But it will affect everybody because signallers are on strike and they control the entire network. Network Rail says it has offered workers a 2-year 8% pay deal with a guarantee of no compulsory redundancies. But it claims the RMT has walked away without giving their members a voice or a choice. RMT Assistant General Secretary John Leach spoke to LBC last night.
It's not fair that 40,000 railway workers tomorrow will be forced to take industrial action when all they want to do is come to work, do the fantastic job that they do day in, day out, keeping Britain moving. And it's not fair that the travelling public are going to be inconvenienced by a strike. Of course that's not fair, but what's really not fair is the approach by this government of trying to starve finances out of the railway industry and in the tube as well. That's another story as well. And forcing the staff into this dreadful situation.
David Sidebottom, the director of Transport Focus, says this could just keep happening if it's not sorted out.
People do need to travel to places of work, get to medical appointments, other important appointments as well. And I think what they want to see now are the parties involved, the train companies, Network Rail and the unions, get round the table and thrash out a deal, reach a compromise, whatever it takes to prevent this further strike action.
David Sidebottom from the Transport Focus Watchdog concluding Charlotte Lynch's report. Let's just pick up a little bit then on what Mick Lynch is saying. These are, quotes, the most extreme measures since unions were legalised in 1871. He goes on, we're at a real crossroads, anti-union proposals coming on the back of the misery caused by the cost of living crisis. Here we are, it's time for workers across the economy, whether you're a member of a union or not, to take a stand 30 days of becoming Prime Minister, new measures would be brought in. The minimum threshold of support for strikes would go from 40% of workers to 50%. The notice period would be doubled to 4 weeks. And workers, as was referenced in our report, workers would no longer receive tax-free payments from unions during strike days. Sean Moore is a professor in employment relations and human resource management at the University of Greenwich and joins me now. Is this in some way, because of perhaps some of the measures Liz Truss is considering, is this a sign of warfare in your view? Professor, good morning.
Good morning. Well, it is, if she goes through with these measures, it would be a major attack on organised workers generally across the UK. And don't forget, we've had very stringent rules on unions in the past decades. It's incredibly difficult for unions to win strike ballots because of the
They seem to do it rather well, though, Professor, don't they?
Well, they have done it well, haven't they? The amazing turnouts they get and the amazing majorities are against a background where, you know, the Tory government has tried to make it very difficult for workers to win ballots in terms of having to get a turnout of over 50%. If they increase that, it will be harder. But as you say, the evidence is that the mood is such that they are winning these battles. And I have to say, it would be quite ironic for Liz Truss to introduce such measures to make these electoral processes more stringent when she will be elected by 120,000 Tory party members.
Does she have the right, if she becomes Prime Minister, to look or to attempt to try and guarantee a minimum level of service on national infrastructure such as railways?
Well, I think that's a major attack on workers' right to strike, isn't it? And in most countries...
Don't other people have the right to go to work, Professor?
Well, people have the right to go to work, but also workers have the right to withdraw their labour, don't they? And we're in a situation where we've seen the suppression of wages over the last decades, and something has to break, doesn't it? You can't hold down wages for decades and then have huge rates of inflation without people responding.
But lastly, what about the man or woman listening today who won't get paid because he or she can't get to work and they've not been balloted?
Well, I'm not sure that people won't get paid if they don't go to work.
Well, of course some people don't get paid if they don't go to work.
Well, that's...
If they're not able to go and collect their van to do their deliveries or whatever it might be, they won't get paid, and that's fair in your book, is it?
Well, that's a symptom of the kind of contracts we have in this country and the kind of insecure contracts that have been introduced in the past years where people don't get paid if they work, isn't it? But, you know, the right to withdraw your labour is a basic human right, and after decades of attacks on pay, something is going to break. You can't hold down wages and have huge increases in profits and increases in the pay of the super rich without something breaking at some point.
All right. I know everyone's in the super rich, but I'm grateful to you. Sorry, how much money do you earn to be super rich, Professor?
Well, we're talking about people who...
In 2 miles to junction 3, take the A312 exit to Harrow, Hayes.
You're taking home a 6-figure salary, which a small proportion of the population do, and it has increased. The top 1% are taking home much more than they did decades ago. The increase in inequality and what's going to pay and what's going to shareholders is massively diverged over the past decades.
So the union bosses are super rich, the leaders of the unions?
Well, I don't think that we're talking the same
So they're super
level.
rich, lead out the people who are making 20 grand a year to not make any pay because they're on strike.
So that's again 20 grand a year?
So the super rich union bosses lead their members who in some instances are making 25,000 pounds sweeping the floor at Euston Station, and they don't get any money, but that's the super rich.
I don't think union leaders are super rich. We are talking about people who take millions home and shareholders who to make profits out of the rail companies.
Okay, grateful for your time. Thank you. Sean Moore is Professor in Employment Relations and Human Resource Management at the University of Greenwich. Now to the problem of the rail strike. Sir Peter Henny, Chairman of Network Rail and was Commissioner of Transport London for the key period during the Olympics, actually, that we're looking back later, through 2006 through 2015. Can you imagine, Sir Peter, it was 10 years ago today that the Olympics kicked off. I'm sure you have happy memories of that time, but not so happy today. Do you see a solution anywhere in sight? Morning to you, sir.
Morning. We would like the RNT to make the offer that we've made to them, to their members. This is the 4th day of dispute. We've made some offers. None of them have ever been put to their members. We think that's quite unfair.
In a 1/4 mile at junction 3, take the A312 exit to Harrow, Hayes.
And what is it that you're able to offer them, Sir Peter?
2-year 8% deal with benefits and bonuses on the table, no compulsory redundancy, and 75% discounted travel.
Exit at junction 3.
Package in these circumstances, bearing in mind that nobody on the railway was furloughed during COVID, and the government plunged 16 billion into the...
In a quarter of a mile, at Cranford Parkway interchange, take the 4th exit onto the Parkway, A312.
Members of the unions might actually go for this.
Well, we think they deserve to at least be able to consider it, and I think that what you reported the leaders of the RMT as saying earlier it is probably quite right. We think we're in the middle of a challenge to the government. That's their business, but actually we're trying to run the railway. We're trying to run it in very difficult financial circumstances after COVID with high inflation, and we're trying to do a deal for our staff who deserve decent pay and conditions to give them as much as we can. We also need to modernise the railway. We need to do the things in productivity that other similar organisations do, and of course it's all wrapped up together. Not every part of this package will be welcome to everybody, but if you say, for example, that the trade union doesn't want any compulsory redundancy, we believe we can honour that. We believe that we can allow a number of people in the autumn of their careers to go on voluntary severance, which many of them want to do, and to modernise the railway. We think it's quite a decent position, but we can't get the RMT leadership and executive to put it to the members, and I think you and your listeners will draw their own conclusions about what that means, about what they actually think they're fighting, whether they think they're trying to get a decent deal for their members or whether they're trying to take it out against the government.
Last question, Sir Peter. When Liz Truss says we need tough and decisive action to limit trade unions' ability to paralyse our economy, and specifically to your role, looking to try and legislate to keep a minimum service level on things such as the railways, is she right, Sir Peter?
Well, let me tell you this about my experience. I don't think there was hardly a day in the 9.5 years when I ran Transport for London, both for Ken Livingstone and for Boris Johnson, when we didn't have the threat or an actual dispute from the RMT. I think in the last 3 years in the railway, there's barely been a day when we haven't had the threat of a dispute or an actual dispute. It's not a very happy way of running things. It doesn't give much certainty to our employees.
Exit the roundabout onto the Parkway.
It's the way that we want to move into the third and fourth decades of the 21st century. What the government does is a political measure, but as a transport manager,
continue on the Parkway for 1 mile.
Constant disputes is actually really unhelpful. It's done because it can be done. And it's done because the result of a dispute disrupts the public. But every day that you do it diminishes people's faith in the railway. And you can see, I'm sitting at home this morning in Richmond talking to you. You can see me, you can hear me. I haven't moved this morning. There'll be many, many people today who will be at work, at home, without using transport. That isn't how you want the railway to survive into the 21st century, is it?
No, it's not. Well, many would say it's not, but others would, of course, take this side of the strikers. Sir Peter, as ever, thank you. Thanks for your time. Sir Peter Hendy, Chairman of Network Rail. We're late to those news headlines. 7:18 news. Simon Conway.
40,000 rail workers are on strike again, with only around 1 in 5 trains running across Britain today. Rishi Sunak says he would scrap VAT on energy bills for a year if he becomes Prime Minister, having rejected the idea in February. England's women are through to their first major final since 2009, after thrashing Sweden 4-0 at the Euros. LBC weather, dry and fine for most, a high of 23 degrees.
LBC Travel, I'm Joanne, where because of the train strike, only about 20% of the usual train services are able to run. Large parts of the network are completely suspended and most branch lines can't run. So most train companies are advising their passengers to only travel if it's absolutely necessary. And lots of stations are closed as well. For example, only 44 of the 180 southeastern stations are open. The strike's also having an impact onto the underground, with the Bakerloo line suspended between Queen's Park and Harrow and Wealdstone, and the District line can't run between Parsons Green and Wimbledon, and between Turnham Green and Richmond. And on the roads, there are queues on the M20 westbound to Junction 3 at the M26, and that's after a van broke down.
This is LBC.
This is Kat. Hiya. This is Dan. Hey. Cycling in the centre of the lane to be seen around the bends. Kat says Dan's an amazing dancer. Is she just humouring him? Definitely. Does he keep on dancing?
Always.
Maybe you know a Kat. Hey. Maybe you know a Dan. Hi. Either way, when safe and they move over to allow you past, give them at least 1.5 metres. Or more if you're going over 30 miles per hour. Whoever you meet, travel like you know them. Think. Check the highway code changes. Applies to Great Britain only.
Call Nick Ferrari now. 0345 6060 973 LBC.
22 years. That's how much of your life you spend online. Can you afford to live a quarter of your life unprotected? Now's your chance. Get NordVPN's special offer at nordvpn.com for your online privacy and security. It's simple. Download the...
In a quarter of a mile, at Wagoners Roundabout, take the second exit and stay on the Parkway A312.
A lot of life can happen in 2 years. So it's good to know that with a Barclaycard Platinum credit card, you could get 0% interest on purchases for up to 2 years. Handy when you want to spread the cost.
Ladies and gentlemen, a toast to the groom and groom.
Check your eligibility now at barclaycard.co.uk. Representative example, 22.9% APR representative variable, 22.9% purchase rate per annum variable based on £1,200 credit limit. Subject to application, financial circumstances and borrowing history. New customers only. T's and C's and exclusions apply.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Time 7:22, calls coming in. Manjeet, you'll be the first caller concerning these rail strikes.
Exit the roundabout onto the Parkway.
The front pages for you. The strikes are front page of the...
Continue on A312 for 1.5 miles.
War on workers, that's the line very much that I'm taking, and I'm asking you, do you think the government is at war with the workers, or we the workers are at war with the government? It's front page of the Metro, quite